Today, we're rediving into one of the most controversial and complex cases in modern Canadian history, the story of Omar Khadr. It's a tale of a young boy caught in the crossfire of war, politics, and justice, and it forces us to ask some very difficult questions. Omar Khadr was just 15 years old when his life changed forever. In 2002, he was captured by U.S. forces following a firefight in Afghanistan. A Canadian citizen, he was found in a compound associated with Al-Qaeda. During that firefight, a grenade was thrown that resulted in the death of U.S. Army Sergeant First Class Christopher Spear. Khadr was gravely wounded but survived, and was accused of throwing that fatal grenade. What followed was over a decade of detention at the infamous Guantanamo Bay. Khadr was subjected to interrogations that the Supreme Court of Canada would later describe as oppressive and contrary to international human rights law. His case sparked global outrage. Human rights organizations and legal experts worldwide argued that, as a minor at the time of his capture, he should have been treated as a child soldier, not an adult combatant. They argued that his rights were being systematically violated. Despite this intense debate, Khadr was charged in a U.S. military commission, a system heavily criticized for its lack of due process and fairness compared to civilian courts. In 2010, facing the prospect of a lifetime in detention, he accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to several charges, including murder in violation of the laws of war, in exchange for an 8-year sentence and the possibility of serving the remainder of it in Canada. Now, where does the Canadian government fit into all this? Throughout his years at Guantanamo, the Canadian government at the time, under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, was criticized for its inaction. Despite Khadr being a Canadian citizen and a minor when captured, the government did not actively seek his repatriation and largely supported the U.S. military commission process. However, public pressure and numerous legal challenges began to shift the tide. After a long-fought battle, Khadr was finally transferred to a Canadian prison in 2012. A year later, in a landmark decision, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that Canadian officials had participated in a process that violated his rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Khadr was eventually released on bail in 2015, but the most explosive chapter of his story was yet to come. In 2017, the Canadian government, now under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, announced it had reached a settlement with Omar Khadr. He received a formal apology and a reported $10.5 million in compensation for the Canadian government's role in the violation of his constitutional rights. This decision ignited a firestorm of debate across the country. Critics were outraged, arguing that a convicted terrorist was being rewarded, and they pointed to the family of the fallen soldier, Sergeant Spear. They felt it was a betrayal of justice and our allies. On the other hand, supporters of the settlement argued that it was not a reward, but a necessary admission of failure. They contended that the Canadian government had a duty to protect its citizens' rights, regardless of the allegations against them, and that this payment was the price for failing to do so. The Supreme Court had already established the violation of his rights, making a settlement a legal inevitability to avoid a more costly court battle. Today, Omar Khadr lives as a free man. He has expressed remorse and apologized to the family of Sergeant Spear for the pain he caused. Yet, he remains a deeply divisive figure. Is he a tragic victim? A child soldier manipulated and abused by a system that failed him? Or is he a terrorist who got away with murder? Omar Khadr's story is not a simple one, with easy answers. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our responsibilities in the war on terror, the rights of child soldiers, and the true meaning of justice. What do you think? Was the settlement justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story thought-provoking, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome. Today, we're re-delving into one of the most complex and divisive stories in recent Canadian history, the story of Omar Khadr. It's a narrative that forces us to confront difficult questions about war, justice, and the very definition of a child soldier. Imagine this. You're 15 years old. You're a Canadian citizen, but you find yourself in a war zone in Afghanistan. This was Omar Khadr's reality in 2002. Following a firefight with US forces, he was found severely wounded in the rubble. He was accused of throwing the grenade that killed US Army Sergeant Christopher Spear. This single event would set in motion a legal and ethical saga spanning more than a decade. After his capture, Khadr wasn't treated like a typical prisoner of war, nor was he treated as a minor. He was transported to the infamous Guantanamo Bay detention camp. For over 10 years, he was held there, subjected to interrogations and conditions that human rights organizations around the world condemned. Groups like Amnesty International and UNICEF argued that, as a 15-year-old, at the time of his capture, Khadr should have been considered a child soldier, deserving of rehabilitation, not indefinite detention and prosecution. The allegations of mistreatment and the violation of his rights as a minor sparked global outrage and cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Despite the fierce debate, Khadr was put on trial in a US military tribunal, a system heavily criticized for its lack of due process and fairness compared to civilian courts. In 2010, facing the prospect of a life sentence, he accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to several charges, including murder and violation of the laws of war, and was given an 8-year sentence, with the agreement that he could serve the remainder in Canada after 1 more year in Guantanamo. Now, where was the Canadian government in all of this? During his decade at Guantanamo, despite his Canadian citizenship, the government at the time, led by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, largely refused to intervene or advocate for his repatriation. Canadian officials even participated in his interrogations at Guantanamo, a fact that would later become a critical point in his legal battles. The government's stance was that Khadr faced serious charges and should go through the US military process. This position was deeply controversial, with many Canadians and legal experts arguing that the government was failing its duty to protect one of its own citizens, especially a minor. The tide began to turn, thanks to sustained pressure from the public and human rights advocates, and a series of court challenges. In 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada delivered a landmark ruling. It found that Canadian officials had violated Khadr's fundamental rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms by participating in the US process at Guantanamo. This ruling was a monumental moment, confirming that the Canadian government had played a part in the breach of his rights. Finally, in 2012, Khadr was transferred to Canada to serve the rest of his sentence. He was released on bail in 2015 while he appealed his US convictions. But the story was far from over. In 2017, the Canadian government, now under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, made a decision that sent shockwaves across the country. They formally apologized to Omar Khadr and awarded him a $10.5 million settlement. The government's reasoning was that the settlement was a necessary step to address the charter violations acknowledged by the Supreme Court. The payment was compensation for the Canadian state's complicity in the mistreatment he endured. This decision ignited a firestorm of public debate. Critics were outraged, arguing that a convicted individual shouldn't receive millions from taxpayers, especially given the death of Sergeant Spear. They saw it as a betrayal of an allied soldier. On the other side, supporters argued the payment wasn't about the events in Afghanistan, but about holding the Canadian government accountable for violating the rights of its own citizen. For them, it was a crucial affirmation that the rule of law applies to everyone, even when it's uncomfortable. Today, Omar Khadr is a free man. He has expressed remorse and apologized to the family of Sergeant Spear. He remains a deeply polarizing figure, symbol of a child caught in the machinery of war for some, and an unpunished enemy combatant for others. His story isn't just about one person. It forces us to ask profound questions. What are our obligations to child soldiers? Where does government accountability begin and end? And how do we balance justice for victims with the fundamental rights of the accused? What are your thoughts on this incredibly complex case? Was the settlement justice, or was it a mistake? Let us know your perspective in the comments below. We read them all. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. Thanks for watching.